All right, so we're going to dive right back into it. Um, Next up is James Flum, a resident engineer, and he's going to talk about the I-435 and I-70 interchange project. So, James, take it away.
Thank you, Eric, and thank you everyone for this opportunity to talk about this project. Like Eric said, my name is James Flum. I'm a resident engineer out of the Stadium Project Office here in the Kansas City District. And I'm going to talk about the I-435 and I-70 interchange and some of the things that we did on this project. So to start with, for those of you that may be unfamiliar with the Kansas City area, if you look at the top left corner of this map, you'll see downtown Kansas City. So think downtown airport, Bartle Hall, Sprint Center, West Bottoms. And then if you work your way from the top left down to the bottom right, that's where you'll see Arrowhead Stadium, you'll see Kauffman Stadium, and then also in that area is the interstates of I-435 and I-70. And that's where this project occurred is at that intersection, really focusing on 435 as well as the ramp to ramp or interstate to interstate connections that we had. So, with every job that we do, it's not just going out there and just willy-nilly picking projects. There's a reason behind the jobs that are picked. And for 435/70, where it really started is with the deteriorating bridges. And so I've got 4 bridges marked here. There's one for northbound 435, one for southbound 435, and then kind of on the left and the right side, there's these curved bridges, which would be the left-hand exits in this interchange. And the one on the left would take you for northbound 435 to westbound I-70. And then on the right is the one that would take you southbound 435 to eastbound 70. And so, like I said, deteriorating bridges, particularly in the left-hand exit bridges, is really what started this project. But if we had just gone in and replaced these bridges and looked at the region as a whole, I don't think that we could have called this project a success. And so really where we go from here is we may start with the deteriorating bridges, but we need to look at the operations of the interchange. And so that leads us to this next piece, which is the left-hand exits. And particularly, we're looking at the southbound 435 to eastbound I-70. And what would occur here is due to things happening downstream, this ramp would actually back up onto southbound I-435 for about a mile, I would say. And so what you have is you have 2 lanes of traffic here going by afternoon rush hour at 70 miles per hour. And then you have this left inside lane where you have traffic at a standstill. And so that is not a safe condition that we want to have. And so that is one of the things that we're looking at, that was looked at as a part of this. And then if you follow the arrow down the ramp to the next one, you'll see this area here where I've got these 3 lines, the yellow line being southbound 435, the green line being eastbound I-70, and then the red line being northbound 435. And so in this very short section, I have these 3 directions all coming into one area, and then they've got to switch across 3 different lanes to get to either eastbound I-70 or Blue Ridge Cutoff. And so, like I said, we start with bridges, but operations is also a key factor in all of this. And so, teams are put together to look at this, and I'll talk about that in a second. And my background is construction, so I really get the product of all the hard work of the planners, of the designers, and once that goes out to bid, then we administer it from there. And so, kind of some of the specifics on the job as it was administered. It went to Emery Sapp & Sons in August of 2018 for $47.5 million. I'm not going to go through all these lines here, but the important thing to keep in mind is that we really did all different kinds of works. We had bridges, walls, dirt that was moved, concrete paving. This post-tension straddle bent is a part of a bridge. And really, this is just to say that we had non-typical bridges installed on the project. And then just for fun, because we felt like we didn't have enough going on, we added 2 asphalt jobs on top of it where we repaved I-435 and I-70. And so I was thinking about it earlier, And I think the only thing that we did not have on the project was signals. Otherwise, we pretty well covered everything within this interchange area. And so then the question becomes, well, what does 47.5 million get you? Especially if bridges aren't the only thing that you're looking at. And so when we start talking about these left-hand exits, what we're looking at is how do we reconfigure them to make them operate better. And so the designers and MoDOT talked through many different scenarios, many different options, and eventually landed on this idea of the partial turbine interchange. And so if you remember earlier, I talked about the north to west exit and the south to east exit. Now, instead of those being left-hand exits, what they are is traffic exits like they traditionally do on the right side, and they get taken into this outer ring, which would be the green and the red lines. And so what this allows us to do, it gives us a lot more space to manage traffic. We're moving them to the right side to exit, whereas traditionally they would be thinking, or normally on this project, they'd be going to the left side. And what's nice, particularly on the red one, is it's multiple lanes, and we have spaced out where all the different directions are coming on. So if you remember earlier, the red, green, and yellow lines, they were pretty well coming in at the same spot. With the red line now, they're coming in 3 different locations that are spaced out, which will allow for a lot better movement of the traffic. And so that's really what we have constructed at this point. We have a few things that we've got to clean up, but that is the partial turbine is what we have constructed. The other thing to keep in mind is that this is a partial turbine interchange. And the reason that it's a partial turbine interchange is because of the loop ramps from westbound 70 to southbound 435, and then from eastbound 70 to northbound 435. So those loop ramps that you can see right there were improved. But to be a full turbine interchange, those ramps would have to have been incorporated into the outer rings. The other thing to keep in mind when we talk about these rings is that the traffic on the red line on the south to east ramp and traffic on the green line, which is north to west, they don't actually intermingle at any point. They are on separate ramps, but it does look like a big ring has been formed. So that was a lot of information in terms of what we built. I think the question then becomes, well, how did we get to that point? I being in construction, we kind of get the product of the hard work that planning does and that the designers do. And then once it goes out to build, we're basically constructing what has been put in. But I did kind of want to talk about some of those conversations that happened before we would have been involved. So to talk about some of the groups that were affected, we're going to go through each one of these one by one real quick, just so that we can see how what their part of this project was, and then also to kind of give it a different perspective is how it relates to what I do in construction going forward. So the first one is our MPO, the Mid-America Regional Council. Looking at this project is not just an interchange, but looking at it in terms of a corridor. So I-70 into downtown, what does that look like? If we just replaced deteriorating bridges and locked in those alignments for the next 30 to 40 years, does that align with regional goals and things like that? And so that's where the EIS process comes in. Mark was heavily involved on that side of it. And then once we get through that, going through the process, we look at the funding of the job and work with Mark on that, and then adding projects to the STIP and the TIP and making sure that those processes for the federal funds are followed. The next piece would be dealing with local stakeholders. So you can see Yellow Freight, Amazon, Blue Valley Industrial District, many small companies. Tesla actually has a dealership within the limits of the project. And so here, in construction, we take traffic control plans and we implement them in the field. But I think it's important for our side to understand that these are developed in a lot of ways with input, with knowledge of the local stakeholders and the impacts that this will have on the traveling public. MoDOT's mission statement, part of it being that we are providing this transportation system to a prosperous Missouri. We want to make sure that we're not doing things that would negate that. And so working with these local stakeholders, understanding traffic needs and patterns is incredibly important. And that was done before the job ever went to construction. What I would encourage people to think about is then, at least on the construction side, is how are we getting that information of the promises that were made? Were there things outside of the traffic control that we need to take into account? And then how are we implementing this plan going forward? Who are the important stakeholders? And so all of that is just communication, in this before the contract and after the contract, and then an awareness that what we're doing can have an effect on people's driving and businesses and things like that. So I bring up local stakeholders just because I do believe that they're an important piece in the before, but then that's also got to translate into the after as well. So, and for us, we have done some things such as even stopping by business just to say, hey, work is coming up. It's been planned. You've talked about it, but we just wanted to give you a heads up of what's coming just so that you're not surprised and you can alert your customers going forward. Another important group is the traveling public. How does their needs and their wants get collected in the planning phase and in the design phase? I-70, we're looking at 108,000 vehicles per day, and 435, we're looking at around 100,000 vehicles. And so for me on the construction side, this is where traffic control plans are incredibly important, because I look at those as being in some ways developed off of the input from the traveling public and the traffic volumes and things like that. And so we have to be aware that when we make changes to the traffic control plans, how are we communicating that? And then also understanding important traffic patterns, events and things like that, and having those communications before or during design and during planning, and how that translates into construction is important. And then on our side, we just handle that through traffic advisories, social media, news stories, those types of ways to alert people. KC Scout using dynamic message signs and things like that. So, these first three things are really kind of our initial pieces that you all work very hard on to get figured out, so that when it comes to construction, we have basically an easier time of navigating some of these things. And so, but what I wanted to show next is kind of an example of where some things can change on you. And I didn't want to talk about the Chiefs just because they were in their second Super Bowl, although it is a nice coincidence and is related. But, when we first start talking about this project and the need for this project, the Chiefs were probably like 2-14 at that point. Cars into the facility would have been down. You're dealing with a very different scenario. By the time it goes through planning process, through construction, or through design and gets to construction, at this point, now we're dealing with a team that in 2019, 2020 is going to win the Super Bowl. And so to me, this is an example of we can do all, or you all can do the best planning. You can do all, work very hard to account for everything. But as time goes, things change. And so in construction, this became a focus for us, not just because of all the fans coming in and out, but because of the national spotlight. So you have 20,000 cars coming in for each game, but then you also have playoff games where we hosted 2 playoff games, which is bringing in national attention, national media, and things like that. And so in the middle of this phenomenal run by the Chiefs, we are completely reconfiguring this major interchange at 435 and 70. And so what it takes is a lot of planning, or a lot of work on our side to understand what their needs are, how, what are they going to do, when can we put out traffic control and things like that. And so for us, we had a great set of plans. Everything was well laid out, but then we did have to adapt as we went on to account for some of these things going forward. So those are the groups that we worked with. And kind of in closing, what I really wanted to just say is I can focus on those things that come up. We can work on those issues that arise in the field because of the hard work and the planning and the design that goes in before the job is ever bid. And so I just wanted to, for my team, I just wanted to thank everyone that may have worked on that project or who works on any projects that go to construction. We, having those things laid out, having those things figured out is incredibly valuable to us on our side, and to understand the work that you all do. And then how those, in some ways, promises translate to the construction world is invaluable to us. So thank you for this opportunity to talk about the project. I'll take any questions or comments, but just remember, this is not my expertise, so I would prefer softball questions or hard construction questions if you have them. So.
Very well, James. Nice loop into the Chiefs there too. Does anybody have any questions for James on I-70, I-435?